the U.S. and people in the Western world they don't really understand what it's what it's like to build a socialist revolution. And so I want to learn from that, try to take the best of the entire revolution while also trying to understand the limitations, the consequences of those limitations, but never let the imperialists try to exploit those for their own ends. That's ridiculous. But that's what happens a lot with our debates about China. It's always about what China isn't doing right and what is limited about them. I find that to be so indicative of the huge problem we face here, which is we have a left which is just too arrogant, too into itself, too attached to American exceptionalism, and detached from the masses, detached from the people. And that's the big problem. There's no organizations that are really in tune with the people. So they don't have the lens, they don't have the way of thinking about these things that can, really square all these circles in a way that is helpful to us and helpful to our causes, and as well as helpful to, 1.4 billion people trying to build a new nation, trying to build a new way of organizing humanity.
Yeah, I wanted to mention this earlier also about why, the need for China to be, have all these surveillance measures and strict policies is because socialism is, happens in stages. It's not like you don't just get there and you have socialism. In order to maintain the dictatorship of the proletariat, you have to suppress the counter revolutionaries that are, which are the bourgeoisie that are trying to take back power, and that's the hardest part. So that's why there's these measures that are taken in China in order to protect itself, not just externally, but internally. And I think that's a really important part to highlight, and why those are the conditions in order to protect your socialist revolution.
That's the authoritarianism buzzword that they use a lot, which is, I just think it's a dog whistle for like, this nation is trying to protect itself from us. And I don't think, that's another thing I don't think liberals really understand. I shit on liberals a lot.
Oh no, really?
A lot to shit on.
Yeah, we have to. But also, maybe you can also touch on like how like the actual government works. People think it's just, there's only one party that's there, but there's also other parties, correct?
Yeah, actually, China has just finished its 2 sessions, which consists of the National People's Congress, which has, I think, over 3,000 delegates from all the provinces and regions of the country, talk about policy, vote on policy. What's so interesting about that is people like to complain about how they're millionaires, right? And there are some billionaires who are in the NPC. But when you look at the actual numbers, out of 3,000, there may be 100, couple hundred millionaires, billionaires. It's a very small percentage, as in contrast to the United States.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about China, and this is what China calls itself, this is what the people of China calls itself, and China literally and accurately calls itself a democratic people's dictatorship.
Right.
And this is what I think a lot of people in the United States find funny, because they think that they know better than China. They think that they think the word dictator is a criminal thing, because the U.S. has called every country a dictatorship and authoritarian dictatorship that it wants to overthrow.
Meanwhile, it's supporting 73% of the world's dictatorships.
Exactly. What that means is, if you look at the stars of the flag of the People's Republic of China, the stars represent the classes of China: the national bourgeoisie, I think it's the intelligentsia, the peasantry, and the workers. Those are the classes, right? So China is supposed to be representative of all of them, regardless of whether we like the national bourgeoisie or not. The Socialist Revolution said it has a role to play in this society, and that role is to develop the productive forces, not to take over the country and become a bourgeoisie. That, very clear that hasn't happened in China. But we just look at the 2 sessions, right? The NPC is one, where you have thousands of delegates from all over the country, creating national policy, talking about old policies, international and domestic. And that happens every year. So that that's something, in the United States, there's never any conversation about policy, but China is doing it annually. So in the two sessions, there's the second part of the two sessions, which is the China People's Political Consultative Conference, which is, yes, the other 7 parties are brought into the fold. There's many different parties. There's a party that represents Taiwan. There's a Democratic Party. There are neoliberal parties. There are parties of, there's others that also participate in formulating policy, talking about it. So, there's a lot of discussion, debate that occurs. Of course, the big thing that happened was the Hong Kong national security legislation was what splashed here in the United States, but a lot of other things were talked about. How much money do we invest in anti-poverty initiatives? I think just about how do we recover from the pandemic, how much money, how much investment, how much preparation do we need in the future, for another similar situation, right? I think what's important about China's political system is that when we think about this idea of democratic people's dictatorship, it really is this dialectical process of top-down leadership. Yes, top-down leadership is not necessarily a bad thing. And there's also a lot of bottom-up leadership. So a lot of the bottom-up leadership comes from the local level, the municipal level, voting in folks who represent you, voting at the local level. So then they can represent your municipality, and then the municipalities will then vote on the province level, and then the province level votes to the state council level, and then it goes all the way up to the NPC, and that's how these delegates are chosen. There's a lot of consultation that happens up and down the system all of the time. There's a dynamic public system in China of governance that doesn't get a lot of acknowledgement, but in Wuhan, for example, in Hubei province, there couldn't have been 400,000 plus volunteers to be mobilized in an instant without there being a model of governance that can mobilize the people in a very rapid manner, that consults with them, that has input from the bottom up as well as the top down to make things happen. Because at the end of the day, the only way that real democracy occurs is if we can both get things done around the plan as well as ensure that people are involved. And that's always a hard thing to balance in any kind of society. But in a socialist society, it's something that is, constantly discussed. And I think that's really how the government works in China. And I think people really do have a lot of investment in it and believe that it's their process, because not only do they see their standards of living rise, but also there's a lot of effort, especially with the anti-corruption campaign, especially with trying to shore up local governance as the primary means of democratic participation. That shows that there's a lot of attention at the top with a lot of the local problems. And then people, in their localities feel like their voices are being heard, that their ideas are being heard, that their, daily struggles with life under socialism with Chinese characteristics are being heard. And I think it's a process that's always ongoing. And what I think is so important for U.S. Western viewers to understand is that it's their process, and it's one to definitely be curious about, to learn about. But at the end of the day, this idea that the people of China are just not in control of their destiny is such a huge problem. The biggest problem that we face is trying to get the U.S. hands, Western hands out of the lives of people around the world, especially in China now, as they figure out how to run the second biggest economy in the world, the most productive economy in the world in many respects, and arguably the system that will be leading the world in not too many years, maybe in the course of the next couple decades, will be considered the world power in the world. And that's a huge responsibility that I think a lot of people in China are just trying to figure out how to deal with the day-to-day issues of addressing poverty, addressing corruption, addressing how are we going to spread the pie that comes to China, that comes to China as China becomes more productive? All these very practical things, and we should be really addressing the practical things that affect our lives and lives of people around the world from where we are.
I absolutely agree.
Absolutely.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, perfect. Well said.
I am so grateful for all your work. This book is really, it's easy to read and understand, and a complex idea and complex questions and a history. I mean, there's really a history that takes a long time to really understand. Knowledge is half the battle, right? So I mean, I never really watched like corporate news media and stuff like that, but I'm so glad for people like you who really do this work. And I really don't know what else to say. I learned so much from just chatting with you, and I'm like processing it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's a similar thing. Your work has really been very useful and eye-opening, and we really, really appreciate you joining us.
I always love connecting with people who are trying to have these discussions in a very candid way. It's always great to meet folks who are trying to think about, well, what is the principal contradictions that we need to be focusing on the most. And so it was great to discuss that all with you. And yeah, it's stuff that I'm still trying to learn, because this world struggle against imperialism is just requires a real class consciousness, and class consciousness is nothing without workers, oppressed people, coming together and figuring all of this stuff out. I am actually publishing a journal article in the International Critical Thought, which is a international.
Come back.
A little bit longer of a process. But yeah, definitely follow me on social media, because I'll be sharing all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us on the Red Lettuce. We definitely look forward to having you again on soon. We would love to talk to you about other socialist states like Vietnam, DPRK. We really appreciate all that you're doing, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you. Yes, same here. Be well.